For many people, especially those of us who identify ourselves as spiritually minded, competition is a taboo concept. We seek to eradicate it from our being. We're convinced that in order to restore harmony and peace in the world, and in order to reach enlightenment, we have to get rid of competition from our embodiment. However, I'm here to tell you today that we need to take competition out of the trash can and realize that competition is not black or white. It's black and white. I don't know if you've noticed looking around the natural world, but this natural world that we live in is based on the concept of competition. Every life form on Earth has evolved to be the best at achieving its prerogative. In fact, survival of the fittest guarantees that if you do not evolve up to speed with other species, you will be eliminated. For example, the only deer whose offspring will live are the ones who are the fastest, and therefore, in order for the lion's offspring to evolve, they need to evolve to be even faster or smarter than that. There is competition everywhere in the natural world, and like it or not, we are not exempt from the natural world. We are hardwired to compete as well. In fact, the ego, which is a sense of self, can only exist in comparison to something else, something other. For example, the color green can only exist if there is something that is not the color green to compare it to. To compete is to strive to gain or win something by defeating or establishing superiority over another who is trying to do the same. By its very nature, you can see that competition is rivalry. You cannot compete without comparing yourself to something else. So the question is, can comparison and rivalry be beneficial? Expansion in this universe is the process by which Source comes to know itself. New thought is in fact what is creating expansion, but new thought is inspired by previous thought. For example, every thought that has ever been thought is serving as the platform for the new thoughts that are in creation, and those new thoughts will soon become manifestations that you see in your physical reality. For example, 200 years ago, the concept of the internet was inconceivable. People could not even think the thought yet. It wasn't until the telephone was invented that people started to have access to the idea of what if information could somehow travel back and forth as if invisibly. In other words, they could only think the thought of internet because they had something to compare it to. Now here's a little bit of a problem. Doesn't matter whether it was wanted or unwanted. The minute that the internet was invented, it was now in competition with libraries. No one has to leave the house to check out a book to access information anymore. Obviously, in the process of competition like this, some beings experience pain. It isn't fun to lose your business because something replaces it or makes it obsolete. But looking at the previous example, most of us would agree that having information at the touch of our fingers is worth the pain of losing our old process of learning, no matter how feel-good libraries are. And believe me, this is coming from a person who can't stand reading things in digital format. There's something about the magic of holding a book in your hands and the smell of the pages that just can't be replaced for me. The bottom line is, for new thought to be created, for us to go beyond what has been done before, we have to stretch the envelope beyond how it has been stretched currently. When we do this, we are quite often in competition with what has come before, and in competition with people who are trying to stretch the envelope in the same direction that we're currently trying to stretch it. But if we did not have this drive within us, would we be where we are today? In the sports world, there is a common understanding. It's that you would not be where you are today in your current level of competition if all you played against were players who were easily defeated. It's a common understanding that the players who bring out the very best performance in you are the ones who can actually compete up to standard with your own limits. So it's also understood that when you win, your rival in the sport is partially responsible for that win. They force you to raise your own expectation of yourself. They force you to have to get more and more creative. Part of why they're so good at fueling your expansion is because they force you to face and integrate all of your insecurities, which are actually the thing keeping you from your success. In this respect, rivalry and competition can be the very best thing for your own personal expansion and even healing process. It is your rivals that will teach you the most in this life. Now, this is really funny because people assume that there's no competition in the spiritual field. Hell no. There is tons of competition, even for being a spiritual teacher in the position like I'm in today. Now, we've all heard those statements that are designed to decrease the competition between spiritual teachers. Things like different strokes for different folks, or everyone finds the teacher that resonates with them. But if we're totally honest, the goal of almost every spiritual teacher is to find the best answer for how to resolve suffering within all people. Now, let me tell you something. When somebody comes up with the best way to resolve suffering for all people, many other teachers and teachings will be obsolete. Because what we offer is ideas, like it or not, we are in competition for people's attention and agreement, just like politicians are in politics. If one of my teachings directly opposes the teaching of another teacher, our teachings are now in opposition. We could call this a rivalry. It doesn't matter whether they or I want conflict or not, it is there. It puts students in the position of having to choose which philosophy to align with. And this rivalry should stay. Why should it stay? Because it evokes the best out of us. When you see this kind of conflict of opinions, it evokes the very best concepts, the best ideas. Truth has to be refined. Illusion has to be purified. This means you should be rooting for your competition to be good, not so that they can beat you, but so that you can be equally good or even better. In other words, even though competition does not exist beyond the ego, in the realm of the ego it does exist, and it, like the ego, can assist universal expansion and even the progression towards awareness. As much as many of us don't want this to be the reality, as long as the ego still exists, which it does here, and the ego is not wrong or bad, it's actually what's facilitating your own expansion and awareness, there will be competition. But here's the thing. When the ego becomes a healthy ego, the expression that competition takes within the person's embodiment is healthy competition as opposed to unhealthy competition. The measurement becomes about yourself relative to your own desires that are inspired by other people, rather than about yourself relative to other people. So the question is, what is this other person or this other person's success making me aware that I want? This is the game of life. And the game itself is fun until we think we can't have what we want. The problem with competition begins when we see the rival as the reason that we can't have what we want, instead of seeing them as what is inspiring us to know what we want and challenging us to get what we want. The other problem is when we start to see something about us that is wrong with us as the reason why we can't get what we want. So we begin a rivalry with an aspect of ourselves that we feel is preventing us from getting what we want. When this happens, rivalry, when it comes to competition, becomes unhealthy. Because we're so convinced we can't get what we want, our attention turns away from what we want and how to get there. It turns towards our rival and how they're preventing us from getting it. Or our rival might be internal, towards the aspect of us that's preventing us from getting what we want. We're in competition with that. And the way that we often deal with that is very shadowy. We try to suppress them. We try to dominate them in a way where we prevent their expansion so as to be superior or to win. It is this form of competition which most people associate with competition. We have the tendency to split when we have an unhealthy attitude towards competition. Either, one, we keep ourselves very, 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 very small to avoid conflict, and so we don't even enter ourselves into the competition to get what we want. Now, this is understandable. Why? Because if we experienced danger as a result of conflict or competition in our childhood, then it's obvious why we're going to avoid it at all costs. But look at what we're doing. We're not even playing the game of life. We are not going after what we want in order to keep the peace. For this reason, I want you to watch my video on YouTube titled How to Overcome the Fear of Conflict. Or two, the other way we go is we try to put down or eradicate the competition in order to get what we want. This is the angle we take when we have poor self-esteem and feel it's impossible to gain or win something when someone else is going for that same thing. We subconsciously see them as better in some way, and both of these strategies hurt people and ultimately hurt the collective. From a universal perspective, these negative expressions of competition would not actually occur within the collective if we were completely dedicated to the concept of expansion. If we were dedicated to expansion, we would throw ourselves into competition with the attitude of, may the greatest expansion win. This is the opposite thing that is happening with green technology in the world today. What we're seeing is that when green technology is invented, it's obviously the expansion of energy technology in our world. Now, the people who control all of the energy industries, they know that it's better, and they're afraid that they're going to collapse if that industry takes over. So instead of jumping on the wave of green technology and competing by creating something even better, what do? They suppress it. They make sure it doesn't come out. They want to keep a chokehold on their industry, and by doing so, they are preventing the expansion of mankind. They're holding on to their current industry by blocking and shutting down the competition. All of us suffer because of it. If we were dedicated to expansion, we would let go of what we're attached to if something that served our expansion more came along, whether it's an idea, a concept, a way of living, or a thing, for example. If we were dedicated to expansion, we would prepare ourselves whenever we got into an industry to have to stay on top of the leading edge, to have to stay ahead of the wave, so that we were forced to evolve with the expansion instead of preventing it. Now, I have to remind you of something. From the highest perspective that exists, oneness is the reality of this universe, and that means competition doesn't actually exist, because you are everything. That means every win is your win, and every loss is your loss. There is no differentiation between the individual and the collective. When competition becomes poisonous is when we do not remember that all things in this universe are in fact us. It is all too easy in this life of singularity to forget that we're one. Therefore, we forget that other people's hurt is ultimately our hurt, and other people's success is ultimately our success. But you'll hear a lot of people telling you, you should really congratulate people on their success. Now, we all know when people succeed at something that we want, it really sucks. It doesn't feel good. When someone buys a Ferrari when that's what you've been wanting your whole life, you're not like, oh yay, I'm so happy they get to drive around in it. No. So when you are in this kind of a place where you can't actually celebrate someone else's success, what it means is that right here in this moment, you're in pain about perceiving something that you've lost or something you can't have. And it's that pain that needs your care and love and attention. Comparing and contrasting is a necessary part of life on Earth. Looking for ways that things are the same and different help us navigate our environment. Comparing things with respect to who is better and who is worse can have huge repercussions if our self-worth is involved. Comparison thinking is only beneficial with respect to seeing what we want. If the outcome of it is to feel better or worse than someone else, it is torture. It also causes us to lose track of our own internal guidance system and our own purpose and inner calling, because we can easily start to live our life trying to measure up to someone else. Each person is here on Earth to do something completely unique. We have to allow ourselves to find that uniqueness. It's a fallacy to think that we are all going after the same thing. We might think we are, but in reality, our soul is not. So it's about finding out what that unique thing is that we are meant to be doing here. We are not actually in competition because of that. I'll give you a little tip about this universe. Having everybody come to this world with the same concept and the same desire and the same purpose would defy expansion. We will not find ourselves or our true desires or our true calling by comparing ourselves to other people. It is also a ripe breeding ground for jealousy and envy. For this reason, I want you to watch my video on YouTube titled Jealousy and Envy, How to Deal with It. We would not have a problem with competition, and we wouldn't take it so personally if our own sense of self-concept and personal value was not tied in with the concept of winning or achieving something, which it is thanks to our lovely socialization process growing up. When we lose, when we fail, when we don't get what we want, we feel shame. For this reason, I also suggest you watch my YouTube video titled How to Overcome Shame. So once you know what other people are doing, stop focusing on what they're doing and instead focus on what watching them do that thing has caused you to know that you want. Focus on closing the gap between where you are and where that thing you want is. We can use our awareness of what other people are doing to define what we think and what we want, and by doing so, we have the opportunity to stretch ourselves even further. This is the process of self-actualization. We are really only ever in danger of truly suffering as a result of natural competition if we stop using others as a means to become more, and instead see them as the reason we can't achieve whatever success we want, or the grounds by which we see ourselves as not good enough. The bottom line is, competition can either be a tool for expansion or complete destruction, and it is in your hands how you want to use that tool. But just remember, for you to become better, someone else does not need to become worse. Have a good week.